So we're on chapter 19 of your United States history book in section 2. And we're going on with life in America's Gilded Age. When was the Gilded Age? We're talking about 1860s to 1900, maybe up into 1910. In this video, we're going to talk about some of the things here, opportunities for women during this time, the daily life and recreation. What did they do at this time? And middle-class America. And like I said before, during this time was considered Gilded Age, that there were a lot of things that looked like we were prospering, but underneath there were some major problems. And that's why they called it the Gilded Age. But we also find out that this age, especially up into the early 1900s, was a great era of the spread of the gospel. So let's begin. Here's some pictures here, as you see, of people in the Gilded Age. Here's a wedding here, as you see. New opportunities for women. So, when you think of women's votes and such, you think that's not until like in the 1920s or something. No. There were certain states that already granted women the right to vote and even to hold office. So where was that? Well, did you know that the first territory, Wyoming, granted women's suffrage? We're talking in the 1895, I think it was, or before. And then in 1896, Colorado, Utah, and Idaho followed with women's rights. When you think of women's rights, of course, you're going to think of two great ladies that actually went forth to get the women's right to vote. And these two you'll need, and here's some pictures of them. We have Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. They were leaders, especially in the East. Also, colleges started opening up to women, and many women were teaching school everywhere. Here's a picture of Elizabeth Blackwell. She lived 1821 to 1910, and she was the first woman doctor. You see in this picture here, we have votes for women. Wyoming granted women's suffrage 50 years before the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment would grant women's right to vote, and refused to join the Union without maintaining their women's right to vote. So when the Wyoming Territory wanted to become a state, they said, well, you got to let our women vote. And they did. And then we have here the women going to the streets, in protest, saying, New York City women have no vote at all. So basically thinking, we have votes, women can vote in Wyoming and Colorado and Utah, but not in New York? So another picture of the state of equality, women's right to vote in Wyoming. New inventions gave employment for women. The typewriter was invented by Christopher Latham Sholes, 1819 to 1890, and he had invented a way to put type together, especially for the newspapers, He was a Milwaukee, lived in Milwaukee. He was a Milwaukee printer and editor of a newspaper. So, and he needed stenographers and typists. And of course, he gathered thinking whoever would like to come. And of course, the women wanted to learn this, so they came in droves and to be able to take the jobs for typists wherever. And here's some pictures of the women coming in to be typists and to type. So also during the same period of time, of course, we had the invention of the telephone and telegraph. And these opened the door for women to be able to come in and be operators, telephone operators. And most of these jobs, too, were just filled by a majority up into, 90% of the women. In 1890, women's employment increased 305% with typing and 167% with the telephone. So you can imagine women now taking the lead in being typists and telephone operators. The daily life started to improve with laws to limit the working hours for women and children. And women were usually paid lower priced, and so were prices or lower salaries. I shouldn't say price, lower salaries than men and children too. So laws went into force to, stop this and discouraging women and children having to work long hours, especially. Also, the daily life improved by discouraging these political bosses would come in, like Boss Tweed or these bosses, that would to take in the midst of these working people, especially, for these, as these bosses would hire, women and children and men too, but they would say they wanted them to vote their way. So when they hired you, they would have you sign a thing and say that you had to vote the way they wanted you to vote. And that was really not ethical. So during this time, they discouraged these political bosses for making people vote the way they wanted them to. And of course, the women didn't have a vote. They were talking mainly about men at this time. Also, sanitation laws and building ordinances came with new fire laws. We had some big fires in Chicago and Boston, and they needed to have some ordinances of what you're doing as building bush fires or burning garbage and such, right? And also sanitation laws and they needed to be drinking water that was purified, pure water, right? Also sanitation laws with bathrooms and such. So these became an improving life. They also needed an increase in protection, and forming these cities would have to form their police protection. So they would hire their policemen and firemen. Street lights helped a lot, especially at night, because at night there'd be a lot of crime. But now we have Thomas Edison's incandescent lamps. First, they were just like torches, basically, and then they went on to gas to electric lamps. And this made the cities a lot safer. So here's some pictures of how the kids worked here in the factories. And here's a new bathroom for sanitation with a new bathtub. Before that, they didn't have it. It was all like outhouses. And of course, we have the incandescent lamps. We have a little boy here delivering newspapers, and we have these girls they're hiring to work in the midst of the stores. So, and here's one of the first police forces. Middle class America was a new class now. Never before in the world did any other country have a middle class like America. So it was a new class. So the middle class America was born through hard work and advancing economic statuses, right? And some of the middle class lived in quite elegant homes during this time. This new technology brought things to the houses, to the homes, to home life, such as sewing machines, phonographs, gas lights, and of course, bathrooms inside houses. So, and this would balance the comfort and prestige of America. The American dream was the desire for every citizen and every immigrant to become middle class, right? So here we have some pictures. Basically we have the children here. See how the children are dressed with their dog. A woman's hat here that's a very spectacular hat. And here's some families in their home and how their homes were now considered middle class. Even in the South with Black people becoming middle class. Stores would come to be at this time. In fact, we see the store model now would be, give the lady what she wants, right? We'll find that basically from the Wanamaker store or whatever, saying, give the lady what she wants. General stores were replaced by specialty shops. There'd be a wide selection. Specialty shops would have a wide selection, and the general stores were replaced. So we'd basically have certain shops that would specialize in certain areas. So, and chain stores would happen with a broader range and cheaper prices with these chain stores that would go from city to city. A&P was called the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea, were the forerunners of Kmart and Walmart that we have today. The department stores had where various stores would come together so the family could come under one roof and buy everything. John Wanamaker, 1838 to 1922, he was a secretary for the YMCA, and he also was a Sunday school teacher and a businessman, and he was into prayer and ethics and good business practices and advertisement. He put together the first Wanamaker stores in Philadelphia, which were a precursor to the department store. In Chicago, they also started the Marshall stores, or I should say Marshall Field started the department stores there. He lived 1834 to 1906, and he had much integrity, putting together, and customer satisfaction. And he's actually the one that said, give the lady what she wants, right? So here's a picture of a huge department store here in the midst of here. See how big we could buy everything under, in the department store, under one roof. And here's some of the stores. Here's an A&P store. Leisure time, sports, parks, and activities. So what did they do now with their leisure time? Because they weren't working all the time, they would have time, especially on the weekends, right? Because most people would have the weekends off, Saturday and Sunday. Saturday and Sunday both considered as a Sabbath. We look at Saturday Sabbath and Sunday as a Sabbath for church, right? And so most people had these days off. And the work week was shortened, so they would have a lot of time for leisure activities. One of the first things that became important at this time was baseball. The Cincinnati Red Stockings here, it's a picture of them. They were the first baseball team. In 1876, they started the National League of Professional Baseball. The Red Stockings being 1869, so not much longer did we have baseball. Then, of course, here's basketball. And James Naismith here, 1869 to 1939, was a YMCA director. And he said, we need to have some indoor sports because in the winter it gets pretty cold. So he developed what we now know as basketball, And people came to watch basketball. Then came the spectator sports, football. Well, football started in the colleges, but it became very much as a spectator sport, so more people would come. In fact, at the game with Yale versus Princeton in 1893, here's a picture of it. They had 40,000 spectators for one college game in football. Boxing became, and we have Gentleman Jim here, James Corbett, 1866 to 1933, and he defeated John Sullivan, and boxing became very popular from 1892. Amusement time. Well, what did they do with their amusement? Well, things started happening with amusement. First of all, the zoo. People brought in animals, and of course kids wanted to come, especially when they had exotic animals in the zoo. And then the vaudeville shows brought in musicians, dancers, comedians, acrobats, and singers for vaudeville. And here's some pictures of the vaudeville shows. And people thought, wow, let's go to the show. Of course, they didn't have television then, remember? And amusement parks would start forming. First one being in Coney Island here. Here we have a picture of Coney Island in New York City, developing an amusement park that drew in lots of people. Some of the first roller coasters there too, in Coney Island. And you have to know the greatest show on earth. P.T. Barnum and Bailey, they traveled in this tent circus from city to city, and people would buy their tickets way ahead of time so that they could be there during the time that Barnum and Bailey would show up in their town. So basically, P.T. Barnum joined with James A. Bailey in forming, and together they toured the country, and Barnum and Bailey over 150 years toured and gave amusement to many Americans. So, how did they get along? Remember, they didn't have automobiles. We went over to what they had. We had trains, and we had steam, and we had coaches and horse, but something new. Have you ever heard this song? Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer due. I'm half crazy for the love of you. It won't be a stylish marriage. I can't afford a carriage, but you'll look sweet upon the seat of a bicycle built for two. Yes, bicycles became the important transportation in the 1890s. And the early bicycles, of course, were very awkward and very dangerous. So at first they thought, oh, this bicycle, it's just a toy. In 1880, they developed a safety bicycle with low equal wheels and rubber tires. In 1893, 1 million Americans decided to get bicycles. And 1 million bicycles were sold every year. This even changed women's clothing styles. They decided we can't wear these long, big dresses now, we got to ride our bicycle, So they ended up pantaloons and changing their dress style during this time. And yes, they did have bicycles built for two. Here's one of the first ones. Rural life on the farm. The farm life made it easier. Farm life was made easier, with a postal rural free delivery mail. So, of course, the rural life need to have mail-in goods, because they'd have to long distance to be able to go to the city, to the general store. So what happened during this time, there were subscription magazines with new products. So the mail order catalog had happened, and this mail order catalog sold directly to the customers and for cash and delivery. So they would come and bring in their supplies and deliver them and get their cash, right? So some of the first, mail order catalogs were Montgomery Ward here, 1843 to 1913 is when he lived. And in 1872 was the first mail order business, especially for the farms. And then on to Richard Sears with Sears and Roebuck became a very important catalog. And the most popular publication during that time was the Bible, of course, but these catalogs became number 2. So after you had your Bible, you better get your Sears Roebuck catalog and your Montgomery Ward catalog. They became very popular in the rural areas. The general stores in the small towns became a gathering places for the farmers and for news and for the post office. And men gathered and played checkers and told tall tales. It became a gathering place. And of course, the local church was most important because the church was provided for the needy. And also the births and the baptisms and marriages and deaths were all recorded by the church. The church also was a center for the holidays and the worship and public meetings, all in that church. Little white churches all the way across America. The World's Fair. The World's Fair would showcase technology and advancement. In 1851 in Great Britain, there was this Crystal Palace, and everyone went from all over the world to see these modern marvels in England. In 1876, coming to America, the World's Fair, the Centennial, happened in Philadelphia. And of course, some new technology was present there, one being Thomas Edison's improved telegraph, another being Westinghouse's air brakes and refrigerator cars. They'd never seen. And all 38 states in the United States at that time, there were 38 states then, they all sent exhibits to the World's Fair, the Centennial Fair in Philadelphia. Centennial being 1876, it was 100 years. In 1889, Paris had a World Fair, and they presented their Eiffel Tower as their main attraction by Gustave Eiffel, and people came from all over the world. But then again in 1893, Chicago's World Expo became the World's Columbian Expo 400 years from Columbus, and it had a Ferris wheel that by G.W. Ferris that was a major attraction at that fair. In 1904, the World's Fair went to St. Louis, and St. Louis at the same time, he hosted the Olympics the same time as the fair. In 1889 to 1940, all of these fairs would present the newest artwork, inventions, architecture, and later they kind of became a little political, so they kind of declined. But in the midst of all this, the World's Fair before this time in the Gilded Age was very important time for technology to be shown to the people. The Statue of Liberty in 1886, America enlightening the world on Liberty Island. In 1886, in New York Harbor would come the copper statue, which was a gift from France, Frederick A. Bartholdi. And he basically covered the cost by the French. The French paid for the statue, and then the Americans paid for the statue's pedestal. In the right arm of the Statue of Liberty would be uplifted torch 305 feet above the pedestal. The left arm would be clutching a tablet, signing, this tablet being the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And the feet would be broken here by the shackles of tyranny. This was the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty, basically the poem written by Emma Lazarus was put on the Statue of Liberty on the pedestal. It's called the New Colossus, but now we can read it. It was engraved on this statue to remind us, and it says, "Give me your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest, the tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." Yes, during this time, immigrants came. First thing they would see would be the Statue of Liberty and knowing that they had hope in coming to America.